Since coming to the WWF, Roddy Piper has mostly acted as a manager and talk show host, but tonight he returns to the role that he made his name in, wrestler. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Tyler Vance Rants. I am your host, Tyler Vance himself. It is March 31st, 1984. Last week, Bob Backlund won his return match to in-ring action in the WWF. As well, Jimmy Valiant took issue with Adrian Street and Miss Linda, while the WWF World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan remained MIA. I am proud to announce that on the 31st, today, the WWF World Heavyweight Champion's absence came to an end when Hulk Hogan assists Bob Backlund in a match against the Iron Sheik. While this wasn't on Championship Wrestling or anything else, I did want to make special note of it here. The match in question was a special televised event which was hosted at the Philadelphia Spectrum. And while I say that the Hulkster aided Bob Backlund in his match, what I mean to say is that he got the Boy Scout disqualified after he interfered on the match and hit the Iron Sheik with his boot before tossing him outside of the ring. Backlund didn't really seem to mind much that he lost the match thanks to Hulk Hogan's efforts, because he and the Hulkster then took turns throwing the Iron Sheik in and out of the ring like the sore losers that they are. Since I've spoke so much of it already, we're going to start in the WWF area this week with WWF Championship Wrestling, and the first match we get to see is one-on-one action between Mike Powers and the WWF Intercontinental Champion Tito Santana in a non-title match, while Vince McMahon and Gene Okerlund call the action. The WWF Intercontinental Champion doesn't even have to exert himself in this match, as he manages to outclass Powers by simply performing basic wrestling moves.
Not much of a match for the reigning Intercontinental Champion, Tito Santana.
For once, you said it, Okerlund. Tito Santana puts an end to the pain following a flying forearm and wins over Powers. For the third week in a row, Vince McMahon brings us his version of Tyler Vance Rants ripoff with the WWF update, and this week it focuses on the former WWF World Heavyweight Champion, the Iron Sheik. According to McMahon, after the Iron Sheik won the WWF World Heavyweight Championship from Bob Backlund back in December of 1983, wrestling journalists happened to spot the Iron Sheik going on a shopping spree, which apparently included mink coats, diamonds, and a Rolls Royce. What's wrong, McMahon? It sounds like you're jealous. Are you jealous? Stop trying to make the Iron Sheik look bad because he spent his well-earned money. Why don't you instead focus on the heinous behaviors of Bob Backlund and Hulk Hogan and what they did to the Iron Sheik today? What a waste of time that was. Anyways, we're back to in-ring action, and this time we get to see Francisco Vasquez take on Greg the Hammer Valentine, who's accompanied to the ring by his manager, Captain Lou Albano. Valentine spends the entire match just embarrassing Vasquez before eventually putting Francisco away following a figure four leg lock. After the match, Greg Valentine continues to attack his opponent, focusing on Francisco Vasquez's legs for wasting the Hammer's time. Tony Russo is returning to the WWF in action next after a brief period of time spent down south in Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. He is taking on my public enemy number one in that Boy Scout Bob Backlund, who's accompanied to the ring by that fossil of a manager, Arnold Scotland. When the match starts, Russo and Backlund shake hands, but unfortunately for Russo, sportsmanship doesn't win matches, skill does. And Russo's current skill level is nowhere near that of the Boy Scout Bob Backlund's, who gets a win following a backslide pin. Santiago Rios is up next in singles competition, taking on Mr. Wonderful, Paul Orndorff, who's accompanied to the ring by his manager, my friend and yours, Mr. Roddy Piper. I know I already mentioned Roddy Piper at the beginning of the episode, and as a spoiler, this will not be the only time that we see the Rowdy one tonight. The Paula chants that are directed at Mr. Wonderful by the crowd are really starting to get old, and it's also really disgusting that the entire fan base revels in bullying another individual in this way. There's only so much that a person can take before they've had enough, and that's exactly what happens here with Paul Orndorff. He gets super aggressive with Rios, placing Santiago into a vicious back suplex. Then, Mr. Wonderful's pile driver leaves his opponent in a heap in the center of the ring before he gets the 1-2-3. Like I said, we're not done with Roddy Piper yet, as coming up next is my personal favorite segment of the week, and as I'm sure it is yours, Piper's Pit. This week's guest is Marine Corps Sergeant Terry Daniels, who has the honor of being the first member of Sergeant Slaughter's Cobra Corps. Piper starts the interview off by asking Sergeant Daniels how he could literally stand there and take verbal abuse from a drill instructor. The Marine responds by saying,
"Mental discipline."
Piper then asks one of the most important questions of the interview. Would Sergeant Daniels follow somebody like Sergeant Slaughter into combat? And receives the confirmation that yes, Terry Daniels is a proud member of the Cobra Corps. What a moron. Lee Wong and Cowboy Bob Orton are taking each other on in singles competition next. If you've been following the weekly episodes of Tyler Vance Rants, you'll know that Bob Orton has spent his time recently in the Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling area for several months. So why is he in the WWF all of a sudden? If you ask me, Bob Orton is most likely trying to get away from the blatant corruption down in the NWA. He probably witnessed how successful people like Greg the Hammer Valentine have become since making the transition to the WWF and thought, hey, that's probably a good idea for me too. Despite us being familiar with Cowboy Bob Orton, this may be some of the WWF fans witnessing him for the very first time. So Orton takes this into consideration and makes an absolute example out of Lee Wong. Another former NWA man and person we've seen plenty of tonight is Roddy Piper, and he heads down ringside to root on Cowboy Bob Orton, who does secure the win over his opponent Lee Wong following a suplex from the second rope corner. Have you had enough of Roddy Piper yet? If so, what's wrong with you? If not, you're in luck. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, since leaving the NWA in late 1983 and coming to the World Wrestling Federation, Roddy Piper has mostly been a manager to others as well as talk show host with Piper's Pit, and foregone his in-ring wrestling career. This changes now as Special Delivery Jones tries to welcome Roddy Piper back to singles competition. Following the example set by Tony Russo and Bob Backlund by shaking hands, the Scotsman tries to do so with Jones, but gets his hand slapped away. If Jones doesn't smarten up, Piper's going to deliver him a new special attitude. After out-wrestling Special Delivery Jones, Roddy Piper then extends his hand in a gesture of good sportsmanship to SD once again. This time, it's accepted. Oh, that's very interesting. Are you suddenly feeling maybe just a little outclassed here, Special Delivery Jones? Jones does manage to get a near fall on Piper following a sunset flip, nervous or not. This then leads to a series of moves being executed onto Piper from Special Delivery. Things look grim for the Scotsman, but he manages to catch Special Delivery Jones in a swinging neckbreaker, and then it's all she wrote. The main event of WWF Championship Wrestling sees Frank Williams do absolutely everything in his power to avoid the Polish power, Ivan Putski, in their match. The Polish Hammer mercifully puts Williams and the Weak to an end in the WWF. Without further ado, here's what happened in the NWA and Worldwide Wrestling. The Boogie Woogie Man himself, Jimmy Valiant, teamed with newcomer Brian Adidas to put an end to the team of Jeff Sword and Kurt Von Hess. After the match concluded, the Boogie Woogie Maniac forcefully conscripted Adidas into his militia before taking more shots at Paul Jones's army. It seems that despite currently focusing on exotic Adrian Street, Jimmy Valiant wants to let Paul Jones that he hasn't forgotten the unfinished business they have. Okay, I am bristling with excitement at this next news, so I'm going to do my absolute best to keep myself contained. Okay, I can't. Mark Youngblood is no longer the television champion. That's right, you heard me correctly. Do not adjust your sets. Tully Blanchard, managed by Paul Jones himself, managed to outclass the NWA television champion Mark Youngblood in every single category in one-on-one competition, and Blanchard was able to walk away as the new television champion. One thing to note that during the NWA television championship match, commentators David Crockett and Johnny Weaver let us know that there's also a new champion besides Tully Blanchard in the Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling area. That new champion is the Russian Bear Ivan Koloff, having regained the NWA Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Championship from his longtime rival, Angelo Mosca Jr. I don't think that I can get any happier right now. They say never meet your heroes. I was personally so excited when Junkyard Dog arrived in the Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling area, but ever since that Meiji Mutt has arrived, he's done nothing but upset me. He continued to do so during his match against the NWA United States Heavyweight Champion and personal friend of mine, Dirty Dick Slater. The new NWA Television Champion Tully Blanchard, and also friend to Dirty Dick Slater, came down to root his friend on, but all he managed to get was verbally assaulted and then physically assaulted by the Junkyard Dog. The poor television champion's shirt was ripped, for goodness sakes. The rest of the match devolved into chaos, mostly instigated by the Junkyard Dog, but did come to a disqualification end for Dick Slater when he punched the referee in the face. They've had it coming for a long time, if you ask me. Both Slater and Blanchard then took the opportunity to beat on Junkyard, but the Wild Dog managed to fend off his opponents, most likely due to the fact that he has rabies. The father and son team of Angelo Mosca Sr. and Jr. took on Gary Royal and Bobby Bass in tag team competition, which did see the Moscas come out as the victors. To finish the show off, Rufus R. Jones was interviewed backstage by David Crockett, who said to the Big Cat Ernie Ladd, "I have your $1,000 that I owed you for competing in the recent match against me at last week's Boogie Man Gym." Both Ladd himself and his manager Gary Hart emerge and demand that Rufus R. Jones hand over the Big Cat's money. Jones, for then some reason, went to the ring with the money, followed by the Big Cat, who, let's just say, eventually did end up getting what he deserved. While leaving and celebrating the fact that he's now $1,000 richer, Rufus R. Jones began to make derogatory terms towards the Big Cat Ernie Ladd, infuriating him so much that he rushed back to the ring. The duo began to absolutely kick the tar out of one another as the show and the week came to an end. In the NWA, we had two new champions crowned. First off, the Russian Bear Ivan Koloff managed to win the NWA Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Championship from Angelo Mosca Jr., beginning his second reign. Tully Blanchard managed to beat the NWA Television Champion and all-around loser, Mark Youngblood, finally bringing some prestige back to the Television Championship. It was the Roddy Piper show over in the WWF. First, he managed Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff to a victory. Then he welcomed Cowboy Bob Orton to the WWF officially. He then hosted Piper's Pit and interviewed Sergeant Terry Daniels, who announced that he was a new member of Sergeant Slaughter's Cobra Corps. And then Roddy Piper competed in singles competition for the first time since coming to the WWF and beat Special Delivery Jones. In the 13 weeks that I've been doing Tyler Vance Rants, I've covered a lot of extraordinary moments and a lot of extraordinary men. But so far, I don't think any of those men or moments hold up to anything that Roddy Piper can bring to the table. It's easy for us to say that in 2023 that Roddy Piper deserves the accolades that he achieved and the adornment of the fans worldwide, solidifying his status as a legend. However, if this were actually 1984 and I was watching this for the very first time, not knowing what was ever going to happen next or in the future a few years from now, I would still say the very same thing. Roddy Piper is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, wrestling personalities of all time. Before you go, I want to ask you a question. The question, of course, does relate to Roddy Piper. Where do you think Piper excels the best? As a manager, as a talk show host, or in the ring as a singles competitor? If you say all three, you're cheating, and I would say that you would fit perfectly on the NWA Board of Directors. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Tyler Vance Rants. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, subscribe, and hit the bell so you're always notified when a new episode is released. You can also follow me on social media where I sometimes post things. That's it for this week. So long for now. Valentine. The Polish Hammer mercifully pushed Williams. After the match concluded, the Jimmy Wimmy Maniac